Hello, my name is Robert Goodwin, and this is Law on the Line. I would like to welcome my guest for this episode, Allison Sutak. And Allison's an attorney in East Brunswick, New Jersey, correct?
Edison, actually.
Edison.
We just moved to Edison a few months ago.
Edison. And she's with the firm of Arndt, Sutak, and Miceli. And Allison specializes in family law. And but we're not going to be talking about that specifically today. We're going to be talking about something which is near and dear to Allison's heart, which is the emotional well-being, the subject of emotional well-being of attorneys, and how one can enhance their mental and emotional health and deal with clients who expect immediate gratification and immediate outcomes. So I'm looking forward, and I think our audience is, of the tips that you can offer us to make our lives as attorneys better, especially in the field of family law. So Allison, firstly, how did you get involved in this particular area? How did this, or why is this subject near and dear to you?
Sure. So this particular subject, unfortunately, it's become near and dear to me because back in 2019, I was working for a gentleman by the name of Ed Weinstein, who was a great boss for me. I loved working there. I would have worked for him forever. Unfortunately, everybody has their problems, but particularly in family law, running a business, dealing with the pressures of the clients, the court, everything, things became too much for him. He closed his firm, and unfortunately, he took his own life a month later. And that was the first time I had ever had anyone close to me do something like that. And I was speaking to him up until the very end, and I thought, I didn't see this coming. I didn't know. I knew things were bad when he closed the firm, but I never in a million years thought that. And something changed in me at that point. I thought, I don't ever want to end up like this, and I don't ever want to see any more of my friends dying because we're ignoring our mental health, which I think, unfortunately, is what happened with him. So I had started kind of that way, and then cut to 2022 when Geraldine Lawrence became our state bar president. She kind of had this, her baby was the Putting Lawyers First task force. And she had cited some quote, I forget the gentleman that had the original quote, but it was about, instead of, how do we stop ourselves from falling into the river? So, and she had told me she had thought of Ed. So I had the privilege of serving on this task force.
And is this task force still in existence, or has
we did the task force, and our job was to create a report that was submitted to the New Jersey Supreme Court. And the child of that task force is now this Committee on Wellness, which I'm not a part of, but some of the people from my task force are on it, and they have kind of taken the reins to put into practice things we can do to not pad the statistics that we unfortunately discovered when we put our report out.
You provided me with some very disturbing statistics, and one is that the task force found that 1 in 10 attorneys were suicidal. I would never have guessed that. And that we as attorneys are the 5th in suicide by profession. Also, you indicated that when law students start their career in law school, there is a 10% rate of depression. I'm not sure how that is determined, but by the time they graduate, there's a 40% rate of depression.
Yep.
And as you said, if this is going to be the future of our profession, we may have a very sparse profession 20 years from now. So, Allison, what as I mentioned, what are the tips to create a work-life balance and to be able to function effectively as an attorney in an area of the law where there's so many stress factors that are imposed upon you?
For me, and this has taken me years to figure out.
And you've been practicing what, 10, 12, 15 years?
2011, so this is my 13th year.
13th year.
I guess 12, my clerkship was a year,
okay.
So yeah. So, but, and only, I would say within really since everything happened with Ed, and since I became a business owner myself, where I'm grateful to have my own law firm where I can set the tone for this is how we're going to practice here. This is how we're going to run our office. But for me, it's set boundaries. You set the expectation with your client from day one. I have been doing this now for a few years, and I'm grateful to have clients that understand I'm not available on the weekend. I'm not available at night. If you want someone who's available to you 24/7, I'm not the right lawyer for you. But when I am available to you, I'm yours.
Now, you have a family, of course.
Yes.
And you have 2 children.
Yes, I have a husband and 2 young daughters.
And that's obviously your absolute priority.
Yes.
And, you know, one of the things that I was mentioned to you briefly before we, sat down here in front of these cameras is that when I was a young attorney, and only just a couple of years older than you are, but when I was a young attorney, it seemed like the emphasis was not on your mental health. For that matter, it wasn't even on your client's mental health. It was, how many hours can I spend in the office in a week so that either I can impress my partners or maybe myself in terms of I worked 50 hours this week, I worked 60, I billed 50 hours of those 60s or more. It seemed like that was the focus rather than the having a work-life balance. Mm-hmm. Has it changed? And what are your recommendations so that there is a balance?
So I think it's definitely changed. I think it is partially a product of society has changed. Years ago, it was not every family was a dual income household. You had one partner that worked and their job was to go to work, make the money, and the other partner stayed home and took care of the children, took care of the household. And now it's very much not like that. You have mostly dual income households, certainly in New Jersey, and you have a lot of, not to be sexist, but you have a lot more dads who thankfully are involved with the kids. They're taking the kids to soccer practice. They're sometimes they're class parents. So people don't have the ability to sit in the office all day and outdo each other with, oh, well, I billed this many hours. I do have colleagues that still do that, but I will tell you, they're miserable. I have close friends who will compare, I worked all weekend, oh, I'm just so exhausted. And then another one will chime in, oh, yeah, me too, I worked all weekend too, and everyone's ungrateful, no one appreciates us. That's exhausting thinking that way and living that way, and I'm not doing it. So I think that's the trend, is to be more like.
So what are those boundaries that you established for yourself? You alluded to them a moment ago, but what are they in particular?
So I make it very clear. I actually have a disclaimer at the bottom of my emails that say, which I took from another attorney by the name of Laura Volo-Lip, who works up in Morris County. And it says, this email is not monitored in real time. If you have an emergency, you can call our office. If it's a true emergency, call 911. But if it's after 5 p.m., or certainly on a Friday after 5 p.m., do not expect a response until Monday morning. Doesn't mean I may not check over the weekend, but I typically don't, because we as lawyers have limited access to the courts. Courts are open 8:30 to 4:30 Monday to Friday. I can't help you on Saturday. When I was down in Costa Rica recently at the family law retreat for the state bar, I spoke on a panel, and it was Jennifer Weisberg-Milner actually said.
Oh, I know Jennifer, sure.
Yeah, she had a great quote, and she said, we don't have the bat phone. And the everyday person doesn't realize that. They think, and some of it's from the product of watching Law and Order. You see the lawyer, they know the judge, they go right in. We don't have that ability to just get answers, to get a quick fix. If it's the weekend, we can't help you till Monday. So I find, for me, someone who can't shut their brain off. So if I see an email from a client and there's a problem that's got to be addressed, I can maybe respond to the client, but I can't get into court to do anything till Monday. So it's not worth it for me to spend my weekend when I should be spending time with my children, who they're growing by the day. I'm not going to get that time back.
That's for sure.
I don't want to be on my deathbed thinking, I'm really glad I obsessed over that email. Instead of, my daughter says, Mommy, put your phone down. Don't ignore me. She told me the other day, don't ignore me. Can't you color this picture with me? So I put the phone away. I said, yeah, because I want her to remember my mom spent time with me, not that my mom was always at work.
So what other tips do you have in terms of being and acclimating your clients to the lifestyle that you need for your own self-preservation and getting the work done.
Sure. So with clients, from day one, I set the expectation of, if you need me, I'm here for you, but if you want to have a discussion, you're better off scheduling a phone conference. This way, I'm prepared to talk about what you want to talk about, and you have my full attention. It's not, if someone calls and there's an emergency, I will take the call. But it's not productive for me or for them cost-wise if I say, oh, I'm sorry, I got to look at your file. I don't know, I didn't look at that letter yet. It's better if they call, they schedule an appointment, and then I'm prepared to speak with them. And I actually learned that from Ed, and I find that to be a very effective strategy. But I make it clear that I'm available till 5 o'clock. After 5 o'clock, you're not going to hear from me. And people are very respectful of that, I find. Occasionally, especially in family law, everything is an emergency.
Right.
So you kind of have to make yourself as available as you're willing to be. Because I do find, a few times if I do ever answer on the weekend, people will expect that. And you can't get mad at them for expecting it because you've shown them that you're available. So you have to set a boundary and you have to stick to it.
With regard to setting boundaries, do you schedule clients for in-office conferences, or today perhaps even Zoom conferences, at certain times or certain days of the week? And I think the idea of scheduling phone conferences rather than the random phone call where you feel compelled, especially with caller ID, to pick up. And you could be doing something, you could be involved in a process, for example, preparing a brief or certification where your concentration is absolutely needed and can't be really divided. How do you approach that, and what tips do you have in that regard?
So I have tried the approach where we schedule consultations, whether it's on the phone or if a client wants to come in person, by all means. If they want Zoom, I will accommodate that. I leave that up to their preference.
Sure.
I find most people, they want to do it on the phone or Zoom. They don't want to have to come in. Occasionally people want to come in, that's fine. We used to say, okay, on Tuesday and Thursday, these are the days. Now I don't do that anymore. As long as they schedule it and I have an opening in my calendar, that's fine. My assistant, bless her, has been with me since as long as I've been practicing. We've been at many firms together, and
that's good.
She's wonderful. She knows. Don't schedule me for anything before 10 o'clock in the morning because my brain is not functioning. But she'll schedule the client based on whenever I have a hole in my calendar, and she's really good about, if she knows I'm in court, she's not going to schedule somebody to come in at 1:30 if court's in the morning, because we all know as attorneys you might not be heard before lunchtime.
That's
and
true.
You won't be back at 1:30.
What about the phone calls? How do you work that out? What do you recommend in terms of an attorney, perhaps practicing for years, or a young attorney, to orient their day?
So I have some friends who will say, okay, I like to do my calls right first thing in the morning. I tell my staff schedule calls between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. and on these 3 days. If they want afternoon availability, I only do that on Thursdays. I have some friends who say, I want to right after lunch. I need to be fed, and then I'm available to speak to the client right after lunch. But I tell my staff, just look at my calendar and let me know that you've scheduled a call with this person so that I can be prepared. Do not sneak attack me. That's the only thing I don't like. I don't like the sneak attack because it's not helpful for the client. And it's not helpful for me because it puts me in a position where I haven't reviewed their file. I don't know what they're calling to discuss. And then I'm billing them to say, oh, well, I really got to look at your file. Nobody likes that.
No, of course
Everybody
not.
wants a productive call. And then when they do call in, I'm available for them. And I'm ready to, in my firm, we call me the hand holder, the compassionate one. Not that my partners aren't compassionate, but I seem to, that's my gift. So I give a lot of myself to my clients. And I used to take that home with me, where I'd be at home thinking about this poor client. And that's terrible. But again, that's not serving them, and it's draining me, so that the next day I have nothing left to give because I've been obsessing about it all night. So I've been really good about, this has got to stay in the office. You can't take it home.
What do you do meditation, or
try.
what kind? Yes, but what do you do to sustain yourself so you have that energy the next day? And I know a good night's sleep is always helpful, but
Not with two young kids.
But what do you suggest? What do you do following your edicts or your plan to preserve yourself and be there for your clients?
I honestly, I prioritize my family time, my time with my kids. I know that at the end of a stressful day, I'm going to go home and I'm going to see my kids. And I put my focus there. And just not thinking about the work, not thinking about court tomorrow, all the stress, that recharges my battery. I also have an excellent therapist. I think everybody should be in therapy. I wish therapy was, I wish mental health was championed as much as physical health. And I do believe sometime in the future it will be, and maybe we won't be talking about these statistics. But honestly, just having that every week as kind of a check-in helps me. I have tried meditation. I know a lot of people that it works great for. My brain is not interested. I wander. I start thinking about, oh, I got to do the laundry. Yeah. So.
Now, you said something to me earlier, and I took a little note. Working smarter, not harder. What are your, well, we all know that. Work smarter, not harder. Sure. But what are your personal observations and perhaps things that you brought into your practice that allows you to be smarter and not harder?
So when I worked for other people, I always felt like I had to be in the office. I got to be in the office because that's FaceTime, that's important. And I do think that's relevant, but I do a lot more working from home now. I've got a laptop set up at home and I have my setup in the office. So for example, tomorrow morning I have a doctor's appointment. If I worked for someone else, I would have felt like I've got to go into the office, show my face, then I've got to leave, waste time driving to the doctor, even though my house is closer, go to the doctor, then drive back to the office. Tomorrow, I'll work from home, go to the doctor. Depending on the time, I may go into the office or I may continue to work from home because it may not be fruitful for me to drive to my office. So, and if I'm going to do something like the phone conferences, they really help you to work smarter because I know, all right, from 1 to 4, I'm going to work on this motion that has to go out. Then at 4 o'clock, I have a call with this client. And I'm not wasting brain power shutting off my thoughts about the motion to take a call from the other client. And then I'm not serving either one of them because I'm wasting time trying to switch gears between the facts of each case. So I really try to honestly schedule out as much as I can.
I remember years ago a mentor of mine once said that taking these interruptions, and even though the interruption, which could be a phone call, it could be, in those days there were no emails, but a phone call in particular, that if it only took 3 or 4 minutes at most, it takes you away from what you're doing. Because I asked him as a young attorney, how do you build 10 minutes or even a quarter of an hour? Because he said, I think very aptly, because it took me away from the project that I was working on, and then to get re-geared into it, exactly. I've lost 10 or 15 minutes. And so I think exactly you're prioritizing the time is very important.
Yeah.
We briefly talked about, in our pre-show conversation about New Jersey LAP. Mm-hmm. And you reminded me that is the Lawyer's Assistance Program. And I mentioned that I remember meeting a gentleman named Dave Evans many, many years ago who was one of the founders of the program. What is NJLAP for those who may not know about it, and what role and functions does NJLAP do?
So they offer it's the Lawyer's Assistance Program. So they offer help to lawyers who are struggling with their mental health, struggling with substance. The new term, as I learned from someone actually at NJLAP, is substance misuse as opposed to substance abuse. But it's a place, it's a safe haven essentially, where lawyers can go. They can call them and say, I'm having this problem, and can you help me? And they'll provide services, or at least they'll be able to direct lawyers out to where they can get those services.
Is that a virtual entity now, or is it? Do they have meetings, or is it purely a source from which attorneys can receive the kind of treatment they need?
I believe it's that. It's a source. They're there. And when I was working on the Putting Lawyers First task force, there was someone from NJLAP who was a huge help in the report that we put together. And she said she wishes that more lawyers would utilize the services that they offer. And I don't know why it is that lawyers aren't using it. It may be kind of what we had talked about in our pre-show, where years ago you didn't talk about attorney wellness. You didn't want to be perceived as weak. You didn't want anyone to know that you were stressed out or having a problem, because we lawyers, we save the world. We're going to solve the problems. We're going to beat up the other side in court. And I'm finding more and more, we're all kind of recognizing, and this is worldwide, every profession, we're all human beings. There are too many people who put on this persona, like I think about Robin Williams, someone else who took his own life.
Right.
People were horrified. Oh, he was so happy, he was so funny. That was the face that he showed to the rest of the world, but he was dealing with these demons. And I think it's important now that we're having these conversations so that maybe we can all just show nobody's weak. We're just human beings. And NJLAP, that's really what they're trying to say. Don't be embarrassed to come to us. We're here to help you.
Now, I'm also thinking about terminology that we use as attorneys. And oftentimes we use the term, if we're opposed in a case, you're my adversary. What's your feeling about utilization of terms that may be rather archaic?
I mean, the word adversary, I think I remember in law school we were taught, look, it doesn't really mean enemy, it's just the other side of a case. So I don't see that as necessarily a bad word, but honestly for me, I try to just see the other lawyer as another person. That's why I try to be involved in bar events, in the Inns of Court, in different things, just to get out there and meet our colleagues, because then when you have a case together, it's 1,000 times easier to solve the problem. It's almost like, it's not every case, but a lot of cases, especially in a divorce, we adversaries, we can still work together to solve the problem for these people, for this family. And that's going to keep their costs down. It's going to keep everybody's stress down, as opposed to, I'm going to send a nasty letter to the other side to show them who's boss. I do think there are situations where you need to do that, but I find more and more it's few and far between.
I think you made a good point, that participating in bar functions, at least you could see a face on the other side and perhaps get to know that individual as a living, breathing person, rather than as we were stuck in COVID protocol for so long. And now that we're doing a lot of virtual work, we don't really meet the other side or the adversary. Am I correct on that? And I think that adds to the tension in the practice.
100%, yes. I'm glad that now we're getting back to how it used to be, where everyone's going to bar dinners, just the cocktail hour before, the Middlesex County bar dinners, that sort of thing. Like you said, it's to see the other side as a human being. We'll talk about, and some of it is social media. I put on my Facebook, my daughter's karate, that sort of stuff. And then I'll see somebody at a bar function and they'll say, oh, I saw your daughter's belt graduation, that's great. And then it's so much easier when you need something or you have a case with that person. You go, oh, that's great. I just saw them at the dinner last week. It's just easier to pick up the phone and just speak to another human being. We're all in this together. This is a very tough profession, family law especially. I remember when I was in law school, people telling me, oh, what do you want to do that for? That's brutal, that's so emotional. And that's what I picked, and they were right, it is, but it's the colleagues, it's how can we make this better for each other, that makes me be able to keep doing this and not say, forget it, I'm out, I'll do personal injury law or something like that.
Oh, it's something that your personality drew you to the kind of practice that you followed over the last 13, 12 years?
Basically, yeah,
right?
12, yeah, 13. This year's 13.
Do you feel that your clients, maybe you pre-filter your clients, but feel let down if you don't respond to them on the weekends or immediately? And, how do you deal with what their expectations might be? How do you educate your client? That's, I think, the key.
I kind of train them, I guess, of what this is what you can expect from me. If you set up your phone conference with me, I will be prepared for the phone conference. I will be on time, and I am there for you, and you have my full attention. I will drop everything because that is our scheduled time. But if you're going to call me at 4:59 on a Friday, I got 2 kids. I got to get home. I'm not in a position to give you good advice at that point. And I would say 98% of the time, people respect that. They understand. I don't know if it's they learn it in the first 2 weeks or they hear it from my personality, but rarely have I had a problem where a client says, how dare you not get back to me on the weekend? Rarely.
That's good. I mean, obviously, you have a good client control. And that's, I guess, another area. You're a relatively young attorney, and what tips do you have about client control? And perhaps you said them all, but any other tips about controlling expectations?
I think you have to set that expectation from day one. I always tell my clients, I will give you cost-effective advice, and I will tell you what you need to hear and not what you want to hear. Because I think, unfortunately, there are attorneys out there who will tell someone what they want to hear, even if that's not in line with the law. And then when push comes to shove and the judge says, what's the problem? Why haven't you settled this case? And then you have to tell your client, look, you're not going to get X, Y, and Z. Then, of course, the client's upset because you told them 3 months ago that they were going to get that. I tell them right from the start, I would love to be able to tell you that, you're not going to have to pay alimony, but unfortunately, you have alimony exposure, so you should prepare for that. If you tell people that in that first conversation, it may be upsetting at first, but people have time to adjust to that, and then you're meeting their expectation. You're not disappointing them. It takes some of the emotion out of it. And I find this is something I've learned over the years, because I'm a people pleaser. So I didn't like telling clients bad news. But now I've learned you just have to be honest with them. And that really goes a long way. People respect that.
Realistic expectations.
Exactly.
And you're the expert, and you understand the law, and you can perceive what those expectations are. And
Right.
Accurately,
Yeah.
to a certain extent, of course. One last question, area that we talked about in the pre-show, about preparing for a case. We're talking about family law very briefly, because in this virtual world, we are meeting pursuant to court rules via Zoom, etc., for case management conferences and for mediation sessions. And what do you recommend that attorneys should do, and what do you do to prepare for these?
I always like to prepare. Well, first of all, I like to make sure, are we meeting in person? Is this on Zoom? I always have my staff confirm with the court or the mediator. Usually it's the court, because it's the last minute. We don't actually know if we're going in person, on Zoom. And I make sure we call the client and let them know where they need to be.
But I want to, yes, good. But what about attorney preparation? That's what you and I talked about last time.
So as far as preparation, we're very cloud-based at my office. So I've got everything on MyCase. That's the program that we use. So whether I'm in my office or at home, I can go on MyCase. I have all my documents there, and I always review, usually either the night before or the morning of. But I make sure that I review my file. I set aside some time to review my file before I'm going to appear somewhere. And I usually will have a call with the client ahead of time, so that we're all on the same page before we get to court, mediation, wherever we're going.
Good, Allison. And I've just gotten the signal that we do have to wrap up. And again, I thank you for, I think, effectively explaining how to control client expectations, and also to try to establish a good work-life balance for us practicing attorneys. And I really appreciate it, Allison. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.